Max here. In this video, we'll be covering the platformer example. By the end of the series, you'll have a full platformer, complete with enemies, moving platforms, checkpoints, and everything you can see right now. If it's your first time in GDevelop, we recommend you check out the official intro tutorial series. We'll be glossing over some of the basics since we covered them there, so you should definitely watch those if you haven't already. Finally, you'll find all the assets in the description if you'd like to follow along. There's also a text guide if you prefer that to video. So, with all that being said, let's get started. So, after starting a new blank project, the first thing that we want to do is tweak some of the game settings. The assets are designed for 960 by 540, so that's what we'll go for. So for the next part, we're going to be talking platformer basics. We already have a video on this, so I definitely recommend checking that out if you haven't already. We'll start by creating 4 simple sprite objects, which are just going to be our 4 platforms. We'll want to give each of these a platform behavior, and we'll go ahead and disable ledge grabbing. After we've done this for all the platforms, we'll add another sprite object, which will be our player. Then we'll add our 5 animations: idle, run, jump, climb, and fall. To match the source frame rate, change the frame time for the climb and run animations to 0.04, and also set all our animations to loop. We'll give the object a platformer character behavior. There's a lot of settings, and I encourage you to experiment with them. I found the best results with a jump speed of 650, max falling speed of 500, walk acceleration of 1125, and a max walk speed of 200, with all other settings left as default. Then we can build out our stage and place our little platformer character. Now we can move around and interact with platforms, but there's a couple problems. For one, there's a bit of a gap between the player and the platforms, and perhaps more noticeably, the player does not have any animations. We'll tackle these issues in order. The gap issue is due to collision masks, which we can edit using the Edit Collision Masks button. We'll want to use a custom collision mask and then configure the points to better match the actual texture. For some textures, like this one, you might need to use the Add a Vertex button in order to have more geometry to work with to better match the texture. You'll want to do this for all of the platforms as well as the player object. That solves our gap issue, but of course we still need animations. For this, we'll dive into the events, and we'll check for when the player is moving. Then we'll make a new sub-event and check for when the player is on the floor. Then of course, if the player is on the floor and moving, well, we want to play the running animation. We can repeat this for the jumping and falling animations. And then to test being idle, we want to know when the player is not moving. Then we just need to check when the player is on the floor, and then set their animation to idle. Then we'll check the direction of the player, and then flip them accordingly. So when they press left, you flip the sprite, and when they press right, you unflip it. Now our little guy looks a lot more alive. As a quick tip before continuing, I'd recommend using the event groups to keep your events nice and organized. So in this case, I'll create a player event group and put all the events we've done so far in it. This might seem tedious, but trust me, if you keep up with this, you'll thank yourself later. Finally, as a last little touch, we can add a sound effect when the player jumps. To do this, we'll first check if the player is jumping, and then we'll use the trigger once condition to ensure that the sound plays only once when the player jumps. Finally, we'll use the play a sound action, and the game now has jump sound effects. Next, we'll add a score and coins system. We already have a video which goes over this setup, so I recommend you check out that video if you're a bit confused about this next section. We'll start by making a coin sprite object, and then we'll also make a text object for our score display, and we'll also add a new UI layer and add our text to that layer. We'll add a scene variable for the score. Then when the player collides with the coin, we'll delete it and add 1 to the score. We'll also need to update the score text to be accurate, and we can finally play a sound when we collect the coin. Next, we'll deal with player death. First, check the Y position of the player. And in this case, we're going to check if it's greater than 540, which is the screen height. If this happens, the player is off the screen, and therefore dead, which means we can teleport them by setting their position to the spawn point. In this project, the spawn point is 200, 275, and I got those numbers by checking the position property of the player. And of course, we can also play a sound when they die. Now our player will properly respawn when they die. Now to tie up this video, we're going to change this dull gray background to something a little bit more interesting. We'll create a few tiled sprites. One is for the background plants and the other is for the clouds. And we can also add a simple moon sprite as well. Then we can add our background plants object and scale it. Of course now, the background is layered above everything, which we don't want. And we can fix this by creating a new background layer, which we place under our base layer. We'll also create a foreground layer, which we place above the base layer for our clouds. Then we can adjust the layer of our background and add our moon, set its layer to background as well, and then we can add and resize our clouds and add them to the foreground layer. Looks much better now, don't you think? That wraps up the first platformer tutorial. Definitely catch the next video where we'll go over enemies, ladders, and moving platforms. As per usual, we'd love to see your feedback in the comments below, so let us know what you want to see next. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.